The marble floors of Trump Tower echo beneath Italian leather shoes as morning light streams through the glass walls, casting long shadows across polished surfaces. And before we go deeper into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our upcoming narratives. It's 1987, and Donald Trump adjusts his red silk tie, feeling the weight of gold cufflinks his father gave him when he closed his first major deal. The scent of expensive cologne mingles with the faint aroma of fresh flowers from arrangements replaced daily. Nothing but the best for Trump Tower. Construction sounds drift from somewhere high above. Another floor being added, another dream being built into reality. Trump pauses, watching the early morning crowd of tourists and business people flow through what he's created. But there's something electric in the air that tells him this is just the beginning. His name will be known far beyond these walls, far beyond New York City itself. "Good morning, Mr. Trump," his secretary calls out as he enters the elevator, her voice carrying that tone-off respect and slight intimidation he's grown accustomed to. The elevator rises smoothly, silently, carrying him toward the penthouse office where he conducts the business that will, someday, change the world. Fred Trump taught his son that in this business, in any business, you're either a killer or you're killed. Donald, he'd say in that gruff Brooklyn accent, sitting behind his modest desk in his modest office in Queens, the world doesn't owe you anything. You take what's yours, or someone else will take it from you. His hands were always slightly stained with the grime of construction sites. His suits practical rather than fashionable. He built affordable housing, solid buildings for working families, and made good money doing it. But Donald wanted more, needed more. Even as a child, walking through the construction sites with his father on weekends, he would look at the small apartment buildings and think about skyscrapers. He would see the Queens skyline and imagine Manhattan. While other kids played with toy cars, Donald sketched building designs on the back of homework assignments, dreaming of towers that would scrape the clouds and bear his name in letters of gold. The elevator dings softly as it reaches his floor, and Trump steps out into the reception area of his office suite. The walls are lined with framed magazine covers featuring his face, his buildings, his deals. Forbes, Fortune, Time, they've all recognized what he's built here. But as he settles into his leather chair and spreads the morning newspapers across his mahogany desk, that familiar hunger gnaws at his chest. The hunger that has driven every decision, every risk, every bold move that brought him to this moment. The headlines today sting more than they should. Trump Tower opens to mixed reviews. Real estate mogul's latest venture, the art of the deal, author plans expansion. Mixed reviews. The phrase cuts deep because Trump has learned that in this game, you're either loved or hated. There's no middle ground for someone like him. The architects initially said his vision for Trump Tower was impossible, too ambitious, too expensive. You can't build a mixed-use tower like this in Manhattan, they said. The zoning won't allow it. The economics don't work. But Trump knew they were wrong. He could see it, feel it in his bones. He spent months in City Hall, charming officials, making deals, finding loopholes that others missed. One particularly difficult meeting with a city planning commissioner stands out, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked at Trump like he was some upstart kid from Queens with delusions of grandeur. "Mr. Trump," the commissioner said, shuffling through papers on his desk without making eye contact, "this proposal is ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for someone so early in their career." Trump leaned forward in his chair, placing his hands flat on the desk, letting him see the gold of his watch, the quality of his suit, the confidence in his eyes. "Commissioner," Trump said, his voice steady and sure, "I didn't come here to build something small. Small is for small people. I came here to build something that will define this city's skyline for the next century." The commissioner looked up then, meeting Trump's gaze for the first time. Trump could see the moment when he realized this wasn't just another developer with big dreams and empty pockets. This was someone who would find a way to make the impossible happen. Yet the path to that moment hadn't been without its casualties. The original Trump Tower design had Tobe scaled back twice due to financing constraints that nearly killed the project. For 6 months in 1982, Trump was leveraged so heavily that a single missed payment could have toppled his entire empire. He remembers lying awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling of his Fifth Avenue apartment, calculating the numbers, wondering if he'd finally pushed too far. The phone on his desk buzzes, interrupting his thoughts. It's his lawyer, calling about the Atlantic City project. Another impossible dream that everyone said couldn't be done. Donald, the voice crackles through the speaker. The Gaming Commission wants another meeting. They have concerns about the financing structure. Trump smiles, feeling that familiar surge of adrenaline that comes with a challenge. Schedule it, he tells him, and make sure they know I'll be there personally. Some battles you can't delegate. Atlantic City. When Trump first drove down the Atlantic City Expressway 2 years ago, seeing the crumbling boardwalk and the half-empty casinos, he didn't see failure. He saw potential. He saw what this place could become with the right vision, the right investment, the right name attached to it. The bank said no, of course. They always say no initially. Casino development is too risky. They explained in their sterile conference rooms, surrounded by men in identical gray suits, speaking in careful, measured tones. The market is oversaturated. The demographics don't support expansion. What they didn't know was that Trump had done his homework. He'd spent weeks walking the boardwalk at different times of day, talking to visitors, studying the competition, analyzing what was missing from the Atlantic City experience. The existing casinos were tired, predictable, lacking the kind of luxury that would draw high rollers from Manhattan. They were built for the masses, not for people who could afford to lose $1 million in a weekend and come back the following month for more. But convincing the banks required more than market research. It required theater. Trump remembers the moment he knew he had them. The lead banker, a portly man with silver hair and expensive cufflinks, was studying the architectural renderings Trump had spread across the conference table. His finger traced the outline of the proposed casino floor, following the elegant curves of the design, the soaring ceilings, the gold accents that would catch the light from crystal chandeliers. This is certainly impressive, he admitted, though he tried to keep his voice neutral. But the timeline seems aggressive. Can you really deliver this in 18 months? Trump stood up then, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan. The city spread out before them, a testament to human ambition and the power of believing in impossible dreams. Gentlemen, Trump said, not turning around, letting them absorb the view. 18 months from now, you'll be standing in the most beautiful casino on the East Coast, watching high rollers from around the world lose millions of dollars at Trump's castle. The question isn't whether I can deliver. The question is whether you want to be part of history, or whether you want to explain to your shareholders why you passed on the opportunity to finance the next great American success story. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. When Trump finally turned around, he could see it in their faces, that mixture of fear and excitement that comes when smart people recognize they're in the presence of something unprecedented. But even as the financing came together, Trump was learning that his real battle wasn't with banks or building inspectors or city commissioners. It was with the media. The New York press, in particular, seemed determined to paint him as either a lucky amateur or a reckless gambler, never acknowledging the careful calculation behind every move he made. Trump started paying attention to how they wrote about him, studying their language, their assumptions, their biases. When the New York Times wrote about Trump Tower, they focused on the cost overruns rather than the architectural innovation. When the Daily News covered his casino plans, they emphasized the risks rather than the unprecedented luxury he was bringing to Atlantic City. It was as if they couldn't conceive of someone actually succeeding at the level he was aiming for. That's when Trump realized something crucial. The media wasn't just reporting on him. They were trying to define him. And if he let them control that narrative, they would limit what he could become. So Hester did fighting back, calling reporters directly, correcting their stories, providing his own version of events. The first time Trump called a reporter to complain about a story, he could hear the surprise in the man's voice. Mr. Trump, I wasn't expecting to hear from you directly. Well, you should expect it, Trump told him, standing at the windows of his office, looking out at the city he was helping to reshape. When someone writes about my business, about my buildings, about medials, they're writing about my life's work. If you get it wrong, I'm going to tell you exactly how wrong you are. There was a pause, then nervous laughter. I see. Well, what specifically did you object to in the article? What I objected to, Trump said, his voice rising slightly, is that you wrote about Trump Tower like it was some kind of lucky accident. Like I stumbled into success without knowing what I was doing. Do you have any idea how many meetings, how many phone calls, how many 18-hour days went into creating what you saw in that lobby? The reporter, initially defensive, found himself taking notes. By the end of the conversation, he had enough material for a follow-up piece that was significantly more favorable to Trump's perspective. But more importantly, word spread through the Manhattan media establishment that Donald Trump was not going to be a passive subject for other people's narratives. Some reporters started to appreciate the access, knowing they could call Trump directly for quotes, for reactions, for the inside story on deals and developments. Others found his directness intimidating, preferring the traditional arm's-length relationship between powerful businessmen and the press. But Trump was building something bigger than just buildings or casinos. He was building a brand, a reputation, a name that would mean something in the marketplace of ideas and ambitions. Every phone call, every interview, every correction to a misguided story was an investment in that larger project. By late 1987, walking through Trump Tower had become a different experience. The tourists weren't just there to see the architecture. They were there to see something associated with Trump. The brand was becoming bigger than any single building or business deal. Yet, even as the success mounted, Trump found himself restless. The phone rings again, jarring him back to the present moment. It's his publicist calling about a television appearance next week. They want you for the whole hour, she says, excitement clear in her voice. Prime time. They're calling it the Trump phenomenon. Trump leans back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. The Trump phenomenon. But even as he savors the recognition, that familiar hunger stirs again. Television appearances are nice, but they're just another platform, another tool for building something even bigger. As he hangs up the phone and returns to the morning newspapers, his eye catches a small item buried in page 6 of the New York Post. Real estate mogul considering political ambitions? The story is only 3 paragraphs, mostly speculation based on a comment he made at a charity dinner last week about how he could run the country better than the politicians currently in charge. Trump sets the paper down and walks to the window again, looking out at the city that has given him everything and challenged him at every turn. The morning sun is higher now, casting the shadows off surrounding buildings across the busy streets below. People hurry along the sidewalks, each pursuing their own version of the American dream, most of them content with modest successes and quiet lives. But standing here, feeling the weight of what he's built and the electricity of what might come next, Trump knows that quiet was never an option for him. The critics, the skeptics, the reporters who try to define him on their terms, they don't understand that controversy isn't something that happens to him, that it's something he uses, something he shapes, something he turns into fuel for the next big move. What started as a real estate empire is becoming something else entirely. The gold letters spelling Trump across his buildings are just the beginning. Soon, those letters will appear in places no one can imagine yet. Places that will make Trump Tower look like a practice round. The phone will ring again, soon, with another crisis, another opportunity, another chance to prove that the impossible is just another word for something he hasn't accomplished yet. And when it does, he'll be ready. After all, this is just the beginning. The real fights haven't even started. The elevator descends from his penthouse office, carrying him toward a meeting that will change everything. 3 floors down, in a conference room lined with mahogany and brass, a group of men in expensive suits wait with documents that will either make him the most powerful casino owner on the East Coast or destroy everything he's built. The New Jersey Gaming Commission has questions about his financing, his connections, his methods. They want to know if Donald Trump is the kind of man they can trust with a gaming license. As the elevator doors slide open with a soft whisper, Trump straightens his tie one more time and steps into the hallway. His footsteps echo against the marble floor, each step deliberate and confident. He's about to enter a room full of people who have the power to stop him, to say no, to tell him his dreams are too big for their small world. What they don't know yet is that Donald Trump doesn't take no for an answer. And if they try to block his path, he'll find a way to go around them, over them, or straight through them. The real war is about to begin. The conference room at the New Jersey Gaming Commission headquarters in Atlantic City feels like a courtroom, and in many ways, it is. The mahogany table stretches nearly 20 feet, surrounded by leather chairs that have witnessed the dreams and destruction of countless casino hopefuls. Late afternoon sunlight filters through tall windows, casting geometric shadows across the polished surface where Trump's future lies scattered in the form of financial documents, architectural plans, and background investigation reports. Trump enters the room with the measured confidence of a man who knows he's walking into an ambush but has chosen to show up anyway. The 5 commissioners sit across from him like judges, their faces carefully neutral, their expensive suits a uniform gray that seems designed to intimidate. Behind them, staff members clutch thick folders and legal pads, ready to document every word of what promises to be a defining moment in Trump's career. Commissioner Patricia Williams, a sharp-faced woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, serves as the chairwoman. Her reputation precedes her. A former federal prosecutor who built her career destroying organized crime connections in Atlantic City. She doesn't look up as Trump takes his seat, instead continuing to read from a document that Trump knows contains every detail of his business dealings, his financial arrangements, and his personal associations. Observers in the room later noted the subtle power dynamics at play from the very first exchange. Where most applicants arrived visibly nervous, Trump seemed almost relaxed, as if the hearing were merely an inconvenience rather than a potential career-ending interrogation. Mr. Trump, Commissioner Williams begins, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to tomacking millionaires' sweat. Thank you for appearing before us today. As you know, we're here to determine your suitability for a gaming license in the state of New Jersey. This is not a formality. Trump leans back in his chair, allowing a slight smile to play at the corners of his mouth. Commissioner Williams, I appreciate your thoroughness. I wouldn't expect anything less from the state that's about to partner with me in creating the most successful casino operation on the East Coast. The subtle correction doesn't go unnoticed by anyone present. Where Williams positioned this as Trump seeking permission, he's reframed it as a partnership between equals. Several commissioners exchange glances, a detail that would later be reported in the Atlantic City press as evidence of Trump's unorthodox approach to regulatory proceedings. Commissioner James Mitchell, a heavy-set man with thick glasses and the demeanor of an accountant woes seen too many creative bookkeeping schemes, opens the first folder. Let's start with your financing structure for Trump Castle. Our investigators have identified several unusual aspects to your funding sources. The financing for Trump Castle was indeed complex, involving a web of loans, partnerships, and guarantees that push the boundaries of traditional casino financing. Internal commission documents, leaked to the Philadelphia Inquirer months later, revealed that investigators had spent over 400 hours trying to untangle Trump's financial arrangements, describing them as legally sound but deliberately opaque. Commissioner Mitchell, Trump says, leaning forward slightly, what you're calling unusual, I call innovative. The traditional financing models for casino development have failed this city repeatedly. Look around Atlantic City. Half the boardwalk is empty because developers used conventional thinking to build conventional casinos that conventionally failed. Mitchell shuffles through his papers, clearly frustrated by Trump's refusal to sound defensive. Mr. Trump, we have concerns about your relationship with certain contractors, particularly those involved in the concrete work for Trump Tower. The room falls silent. Everyone present knows what Mitchell is really asking about: the persistent rumors connecting Trump to organized crime figures in the construction industry. It's the kind of allegation that has destroyed other applicants for gaming licenses, the kind of whispered suspicion that can end careers and dreams with equal efficiency. What happens next will be dissected by political analysts for years to come. Instead of the careful, lawyerly response that most applicants provide when faced with such questions, Trump chose direct confrontation. Commissioner, I've built my reputation on working with the best contractors, the most skilled craftsmen, and the most reliable suppliers in the construction industry. If you have specific allegations, make them. If you have evidence of wrongdoing, present it. But if you're asking me to defend myself against rumors and innuendo, then you're asking the wrong questions. The silence that follows is electric. Trump has just done something that few people in this room have ever witnessed. He's challenged the Gaming Commission directly, demanding they either charge him or clear him. It's a gamble that could end his casino dreams immediately. But Commission staff members later described it as the moment they realized they were dealing with someone fundamentally different from previous applicants. Commissioner Williams sets down her pen and looks directly at Trump for the first time since he entered a room. Mr. Trump, this commission has a responsibility to ensure that gaming licenses are granted only to individuals of unquestioned character and integrity. The casino industry in New Jersey cannot afford any appearance of impropriety. Commissioner Williams, Trump replies, his voice taking on a harder edge, I've spent the last 5 years building the most successful real estate company in Manhattan. I've created thousands of jobs, generated millions in tax revenue, and transformed neighborhoods that were dying into thriving centers of commerce. My character isn't questioned, it's proven every day by the results I deliver. What Trump doesn't say, but what everyone in the room understands, is that he's already won this battle line in the court of public opinion. The newspapers have been covering his casino plans for months, generating excitement about the jobs and investment he'll bring to Atlantic City. Local politicians have publicly endorsed his project. Union leaders have lined up to support him. The political pressure on the commission is immense. Yet the questioning continues, and Trump faces his most serious challenge when Commissioner Williams produces a folder marked Confidential Investigation Results. The folder contains FBI surveillance reports documenting Trump's presence at social events attended by known organized crime figures. While the reports conclude that no evidence exists of criminal activity, they raise questions about Trump's judgment and associations. Mr. Trump, Williams says, opening the folder with deliberate ceremony, our investigation has revealed that you've attended social functions where individuals with documented ties to organized crime were present. Can you explain these associations? For the first time since entering the room, Trump's confidence appears to waver. This is new information, clearly the product of federal surveillance that he wasn't aware of. The room watches as he processes the implications, and for several seconds, the outcome of the hearing hangs in the balance. Commissioner Williams, Trump finally responds, his voice steady but noticeably more careful. I attend hundreds of social functions every year. Charity events, political fundraisers, business dinners, cultural galas. I can't perform background checks on every person in attendance, nor should I be expected to. If federal investigators believe that my mere presence at the same event as unsavory individuals constitutes evidence of wrongdoing, then they fundamentally misunderstand how business and society operate in New York City. It's a skillful response, but the damage is done. The hearing has shifted from a discussion of Trump's qualifications to a debate about his associations, and the commissioners now have legitimate grounds for denial if they choose to use them. Commissioner David Shun, the youngest member of the panel and the only one who seems genuinely interested in the business aspects of Trump's proposal, attempts to redirect the discussion. Mr. Trump, let's talk about your marketing strategy. You're proposing to position Trump Castle as a luxury destination, but Atlantic City has always been a mass-market gaming destination. What makes you think high rollers will come here instead of Las Vegas or Monte Carlo? Finally, a question that allows Trump to regain his footing. He stands up, walking to the windows that overlook the Atlantic City boardwalk. In the distance, the ocean stretches to the horizon, but closer to shore, the view is dominated by aging casinos and empty lots where grand development plans died for lack of vision or capital. Look out there, Trump says, gesturing toward the boardwalk. What do you see? I see the greatest unrealized potential on the East Coast. 3 hours from New York, 2 hours from Philadelphia, 1 hour from Princeton. But instead of luxury, we've given visitors mediocrity. Trump turns back to face the commissioners, and observers noted that this was the moment when his demeanor shifted from defensive to genuinely passionate. Trump Castle won't compete with the other casinos here. It will make them irrelevant. When a Saudi prince wants to gamble in America, he'll fly into Atlantic City, not Las Vegas. When a Manhattan investment banker wants to impress clients, he'll bring them to Trump Castle. Commissioner Williams glances at her watch. The hearing has been scheduled for 2 hours, but they are already approaching the 3-hour mark. Trump has systematically turned most challenges into opportunities to sell his vision, but the question of his associations hangs over the proceedings like a cloud. The final exchange proves decisive. Mr. Trump, Williams says, one concern remains. You've been quite vocal in your criticism of current Atlantic City development policies. Some might interpret this as arrogance or disrespect toward local officials. Trump recognizes this for what it is, a final test. The commission wants to see if he'll apologize, show humility, acknowledge that he might have overstepped. But Trump has learned something crucial. In high-stakes negotiations, showing weakness is often more dangerous than showing strength. Commissioner Williams, Trump says, settling back in his chair with deliberate calm, I've been critical of policies that have failed. Half the buildings on the boardwalk are empty. Unemployment in Atlantic City is double the state average. If pointing out failure is disrespectful, then I'm guilty as charged. But if bringing solutions is respectful, then I'm the most respectful developer you'll ever meet. The hearing ends without a decision. The commissioners retreat into executive session, leaving Trump and his legal team to wait in an adjacent conference room. For 45 minutes, they deliberate behind closed doors while Trump paces, his usual confidence replaced by genuine uncertainty. When they return, Commissioner Williams delivers the verdict with the solemnity of a judge pronouncing sentence. The New Jersey Gaming Commission has voted to approve Donald Trump for a gaming license. The vote is 3-2. The narrow margin surprises everyone, including Trump. Commissioner Williams announces her dissent, citing concerns about Mr. Trump's associations and his confrontational approach to regulatory oversight. Commissioner Mitchell also votes no, stating that Mr. Trump's financing structure raises questions about long-term viability. But 3 commissioners vote yes, swayed ultimately by the economic arguments and the political pressure from local officials who desperately want the jobs and investment that Trump represents. The announcement makes front-page news across the region, but the coverage is more nuanced than Trump expected. The New York Times runs the headline, Trump wins casino license in split vote, while the Philadelphia Inquirer focuses on controversial developer approved despite commission concerns. More troubling for Trump is the editorial in the Wall Street Journal, which questions whether the Gaming Commission's approval represents a troubling precedent in regulatory decision-making. The editorial suggests that Trump's confrontational style and complex financial arrangements should have disqualified him, regardless of his business acumen. Reading these articles in his Trump Tower office 3 days later, Trump realizes something important has happened. He won the license, but the victory came at a cost. The national media is now paying attention to him in a way they never have before, and their attention is not entirely favorable. The phone rings, interrupting his thoughts. It's a reporter from the Washington Post calling about comments Trump made at a political fundraiser the previous evening. Mr. Trump, you suggested that current trade policies are destroying American competitiveness. Some are interpreting that as criticism of the Reagan administration. Do you care to respond? Trump recognizes the shift that's occurring. He's no longer just a New York real estate developer who occasionally makes news. He's become a figure whose opinions matter on national issues, whose statements are analyzed for political implications, whose business dealings are scrutinized by federal agencies. I don't need to respond to interpretations, Trump tells the reporter. I need to explain why I'm right and why politicians who disagree with me are wrong. When can we schedule the interview? After hanging up, Trump walks to his window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline that has been his kingdom. But for the first time, the view feels limiting. The real estate empire, the casino license, the media attention, they're all just preparation for something bigger. The next morning brings confirmation of what Trump already suspects. His secretary delivers a letter from a Federal Trade Commission, requesting a meeting to discuss certain practices within the Trump organization that may warrant federal oversight. Attached is a second letter from the Securities and Exchange Commission, asking questions about the financial arrangements for Trump Castle that closely mirror the concerns raised by the Gaming Commission. Trump calls his lawyer immediately. They want meetings, he says. Schedule them, all of them, and make sure they understand that Donald Trump doesn't hide from federal investigators. But even as he projects confidence, Trump understands that he's crossed a threshold. The local battles, the state regulators, the regional media coverage, they were all preparation for this moment. Now he's operating on a national stage, where the stakes are exponentially higher and the rules are written by people with the power to destroy him. Later that week, Trump receives a call that changes everything. It's from a producer at NBC, asking if he'd be interested in appearing on Meet the Press to discuss his views on trade policy and economic development. We're looking for fresh voices, the producer explains, business leaders who aren't afraid to challenge conventional wisdom. Trump accepts immediately, recognizing the opportunity for what it is, a chance to bypass the traditional filters of business journalism and speak directly to a national political audience. But he also understands the risk. Television is unforgiving, and political commentary is a minefield where a single misstep can end careers. On the Sunday morning of his appearance, Trump sits in the NBC studios in Rockefeller Center, waiting for his segment to begin. The makeup artist has finished her work, the sound technician has checked his microphone, and the stage manager has run through the timing. In a few minutes, he'll be speaking to millions of Americans about trade policy, economic strategy, and the failure of political leadership. As the cameras begin to roll, Trump realizes that this moment represents more than just a television appearance. It's his formal entry into the arena where policy is debated, where presidents are made and broken, where the real power in America resides. The host introduces him as Donald Trump, the controversial real estate developer who's never hesitated to challenge the establishment. The word controversial hangs in the air like a promise of what's to come. Trump smiles into the camera, feeling that familiar surge of adrenaline that comes with stepping into uncharted territory. The Gaming Commission was just practice. The real battles are about to begin. The red light on camera 2 blinks to life, and suddenly Donald Trump is speaking to 12 million Americans on a crisp October morning in 1987. The NBC studios in Rockefeller Center hum with the controlled energy of live television, where careers can be made or destroyed in the span of a 30-second soundbite. Tim Russert, the show's host, leans forward across the curved desk that has become synonymous with American political discourse, his thick-rimmed glasses reflecting the studio lights. Mr. Trump, Russert begins, his Buffalo accent lending gravity to each word. You've been highly critical of America's trade relationships, particularly with Japan. You've called our negotiators incompetent and suggested you could do better. That's a serious charge against the Reagan administration. Trump shifts slightly in his chair, the studio makeup feeling foreign on his skin, but his voice carries the same confidence that filled the Gaming Commission hearing room just months earlier. Tim, it's not a charge. It's an observation based on results. We're running a trade deficit with Japan of nearly $60 billion. That's not negotiation. That's surrender. What television viewers can't see is the controlled chaos happening beyond the cameras. In the control room, producers exchange glances as they recognize they're witnessing something unprecedented. A businessman with no political experience directly challenging sitting administration policy on national television. The phone lines at NBC are already lighting up with calls from reporters, political operatives, and administration officials demanding to know who authorized this platform for Trump. Russert presses forward, sensing that his guest is willing to go further than most business leaders would dare. But Mr. Trump, these are complex international relationships built over decades. Are you suggesting that business negotiation tactics can simply be applied to foreign policy? Tim, Trump replies, his voice taking on the edge that Gaming Commission members learned to recognize. What's complex about losing? We're being outmaneuvered by countries that understand something our politicians don't. Every negotiation has a winner and a loser. And for the past 20 years, America has been losing. Political observers would later mark this exchange as the moment when Trump's media strategy crystallized. Rather than offering nuanced policy positions, he was presenting simple, binary choices that cut through the complexity that politicians typically use to avoid accountability. The approach was unsophisticated by Washington standards, but devastatingly effective with audiences frustrated by political double-talk. In Washington, administration officials watched the broadcast with growing alarm. Secretary of State George Shultz, reached later that morning by the Washington Post, expresses deep concern about unqualified individuals making irresponsible statements about sensitive diplomatic relationships. Treasury Secretary James Baker's office issues a statement defending the administration's trade policy as sophisticated and effective. But the political establishment's attempt to dismiss Trump's comments only amplifies their impact. By Monday morning, his appearance on Meet the Press has become the lead story in political newsletters across Washington. The National Journal runs a piece titled The Trump Phenomenon, When Business Crosses into Politics, while the Washington Post's editorial board publishes a scathing critique of NBC's decision to provide a platform for unsubstantiated attacks on American foreign policy. These attacks, however, reveal something the establishment doesn't yet understand. Trump has tapped into a vein of public frustration that traditional politicians have ignored. Internal polling conducted by both parties in the weeks following his television appearance shows significant support for his trade positions, particularly among blue-collar voters who feel abandoned by both Democratic and Republican leadership. Trump reads the coverage in his Trump Tower office, recognizing that he's achieved something remarkable. Within 72 hours, he's gone from being a New York real estate developer with regional name recognition to a national figure whose opinions are being debated in the highest levels of government. But the transition brings complications he hadn't anticipated. The phone rings constantly now, but not all the calls are friendly. Corporate executives who previously courted his business now express concerns about being associated with someone who attacks sitting presidents. Several board positions he held with major companies are quietly rescinded. A planned real estate deal in Washington falls through when the seller's lawyers advise against any transaction that might be perceived as politically motivated. More troubling is a call from his banker at Chase Manhattan, who suggests that Trump's political activities are creating complications for future financing arrangements. The message is subtle but clear. Continued political involvement could jeopardize his business empire. Yet even as some doors close, others open. 2 weeks after his Meet the Press appearance, Trump receives an invitation that changes everything. A private dinner at the Four Seasons restaurant with Roger Stone, the legendary political operative who helped elect Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan. Stone has been watching Trump's media appearances with professional interest, recognizing something that most political insiders have missed. The Four Seasons dining room on that November evening feels like a scene from a political thriller. Stone, immaculately dressed in a custom suit and French cufflinks, studies Trump across the white tablecloth as waiters move silently between tables filled with Manhattan's power elite. At nearby tables, investment bankers discuss merger deals, media executives plan programming strategies, and real estate developers negotiate partnerships. But the conversation at Stone's table is about something entirely different: the possibility of Donald Trump becoming a political candidate. Donald, Stone says, cutting into his Dover soul with surgical precision, you've accomplished something that most politicians spend decades trying to achieve. You've made yourself essential to the national conversation. The question is, what do you do with that leverage? Trump swirls the wine in his glass, a 1982 Bordeaux that costs more than most Americans make in a week. The conversation feels surreal, even to someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. Roger, I'm a businessman. I build things. I make deals. Politics is different. Stone's laugh is quiet but knowing. Politics is the ultimate deal, Donald. Everything else is just practice. He leans forward, his voice dropping to ensure their conversation remains private. Do you know what happened after your Meet the Press appearance? 3 separate polling firms called me asking about your name recognition. The Republican National Committee requested background information on your political donations. And yesterday, I received a call from the White House asking if you were a serious threat to the president's re-election prospects. What Stone doesn't mention, but what Trump will learn later, is that the political operative has his own motivations for encouraging a Trump candidacy. Stone has been effectively blacklisted by much of the Republican establishment following his involvement in various controversial campaigns. A Trump presidential run would restore his relevance and potentially his influence within conservative politics. What are you suggesting? Trump asks, though he already knows the answer. I'm suggesting, Stone says, that 1988 might be the perfect time for someone with your profile to seek the Republican nomination for president. The suggestion hangs in the air between them like a dare. Trump has built an empire, conquered Manhattan real estate, survived gaming commission hearings, and dominated national media coverage. But running for president of the United States? That's a level of ambition that even he hadn't seriously considered. Yet as Stone begins outlining the political landscape, George Bush's vulnerabilities, the public's dissatisfaction with politics as usual, the appeal of an outsider candidate, Trump finds himself listening with the same intensity he once brought to architectural plans and casino financing schemes. The early primary states love outsiders, Stone explains, producing a folder of polling data and demographic studies. New Hampshire voters are tired of politicians who promise change and deliver more of the same. They want someone who's actually built something, who's created jobs, who understand how to negotiate from strength. But the conversation is interrupted by an incident that demonstrates just how closely Trump is now being watched. A waiter approaches their table with unusual nervousness, carrying a telephone on a long cord. Mr. Trump, the waiter says quietly, there's a call for you. The caller said it was urgent. Trump takes the phone, expecting his office or perhaps a family emergency. Instead, he hears the voice of a Washington Post reporter who has somehow tracked him to this restaurant, to this table, to this exact moment. Mr. Trump, this is Bob Woodward from the Washington Post. I'm calling about reports that you're meeting with political operatives to discuss a potential presidential campaign. Do you care to comment? The intrusion is breathtaking in its audacity and effectiveness. Somehow, within hours of Trump's meeting becoming public knowledge, the Washington Press Corps has mobilized to monitor his activities. This isn't business journalism. This is political surveillance. Trump hands the phone back to the waiter without responding, but the damage is done. By the next morning, the Washington Post runs a front-page story. Trump-Stone meeting fuels presidential speculation. The article describes the dinner in remarkable detail, including the restaurant, the table number, and even the wine selection. More significantly, the story quotes unnamed Republican Party sources expressing alarm about Trump's potential candidacy. He's never held elected office, one source tells the Post. He has no foreign policy experience. His business dealings raise questions about his suitability for public trust. What follows is a coordinated assault from the Republican establishment that reveals both the threat they perceive in Trump and their fundamental misunderstanding of his appeal. Senator Bob Dole, widely considered the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, tells reporters that successful business experience doesn't automatically qualify someone for the presidency. Congressman Jack Kemp suggests that Trump's criticism of the Reagan administration demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of conservative principles. But the most devastating attack comes from George Will, the conservative columnist whose intellectual gravitas lends weight to his criticisms. In a syndicated column titled The Dangers of Celebrity Politics, Will writes, Donald Trump's apparent political ambitions represent everything wrong with American democracy's susceptibility to showmanship over substance. Will's column appears in newspapers across the country, and its impact is immediate. Editorial boards from the Wall Street Journal to the Los Angeles Times echo his concerns, questioning whether Trump's business success translates to political leadership. Television talk shows dedicate segments to debating his qualifications, with political scientists and former government officials generally concluding that his candidacy would be a dangerous experiment. Yet something unexpected happens in response to these establishment attacks. Trump's poll numbers improve. A Gallup survey conducted 2 weeks after the Will column shows Trump leading all potential Republican candidates among voters who describe themselves as dissatisfied with current political leadership. More surprisingly, he performs well among blue-collar Republicans who typically support more traditional conservative candidates. The polling data forces political professionals to reconsider their assumptions about Trump's appeal. Focus groups conducted by both parties reveal that voters interpret the establishment attacks not as legitimate criticism, but as evidence that Trump represents genuine change. One Republican voter in Ohio tells pollsters, "If all these politicians and reporters are against him, he must be doing something right." But Trump's growing political profile also brings intensified scrutiny that threatens to destroy everything's built. The Securities and Exchange Commission announces a formal investigation into the Trump Organization's financing practices, specifically focusing on the complex arrangements that funded Trump Castle. The Internal Revenue Service begins auditing Trump's personal tax returns, a process that will continue for months and cost hundreds of thousands in legal fees. More troubling is a front-page story in the New York Times revealing that federal investigators have been monitoring Trump's communications as part of a broader investigation into organized crime influence in Atlantic City's construction industry. While the story emphasizes that Trump is not a target of the investigation, it raises questions about his associations and business practices that could prove politically fatal. The investigation forces Trump to confront a harsh reality. His business empire, built on leverage and complex financial arrangements, cannot survive the level of scrutiny that comes with political prominence. Banks that previously competed for his business now demand additional collateral. Investors who backed his projects begin seeking exit strategies. The Trump Organization's credit rating is downgraded, making future development projects nearly impossible to finance. For the first time since his early struggles in Manhattan, Trump faces the possibility of financial ruin. Late-night meetings with lawyers and accountants reveal the extent of his vulnerability. His personal debt exceeds $3 billion, secured primarily by properties whose values depend on his continued success and reputation. If the federal investigations produce criminal charges, even if he's ultimately cleared, the resulting publicity could trigger a cascade of defaults that would destroy everything he's built. The situation reaches a breaking point during a congressional hearing on Atlantic City casino regulation. Trump is called to testify before a House subcommittee about his Gaming Commission approval process, ostensibly as part of a broader review of state gaming oversight. But the hearing quickly becomes a public examination of Trump's fitness for political leadership. Congressman John Conyers, the subcommittee chairman, opens with questions that seem designed to embarrass rather than inform. Mr. Trump, given the ongoing federal investigations into your business practices, do you think it's appropriate for you to be seeking public office? Trump's response demonstrates how much his communication style has evolved since his early confrontations with reporters, but also reveals the pressure he's under. Congressman Conyers, I think it's inappropriate for members of Congress to prejudge federal investigations. I think it's inappropriate to use congressional hearings to influence political campaigns. And I think it's inappropriate to assume that success in business disqualifies someone for public service. But Conyers presses further, producing documents that detail Trump's complex financial arrangements and asking pointed questions about specific transactions. For 20 minutes, Trump finds himself in the uncomfortable position of defending business practices that, while legal, look questionable under congressional scrutiny. The hearing's most damaging moment comes when Congressman Barney Frank produces a transcript of a wiretap conversation between Trump and a construction contractor with known mob connections. While the conversation contains no evidence of criminal activity, it shows Trump negotiating aggressively and using language that sounds threatening when read aloud in a congressional hearing room. "Mr. Trump," Frank says, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "is this the kind of diplomatic language you would use in international negotiations as president?" The question hits its mark. Television footage of the exchange dominates evening news broadcasts, with political commentators debating whether Trump has successfully defended himself or revealed Heisen fitness for public office. Internal polling conducted by Stone's operation shows Trump's favorable ratings dropping for the first time since his political emergence. But the real significance of the hearing becomes clear in its aftermath. Within days, Trump receives calls from political leaders across the country, some offering support, others warning him to reconsider his political ambitions. The calls reveal a political class that views Trump as either a unique opportunity or an existential threat, with little middle ground between the two positions. Most significant is a call from Ronald Reagan himself. The president, nearing the end of his second term, invites Trump to a private meeting at the White House. The invitation is unprecedented. Sitting presidents rarely meet privately with potential political opponents, especially those who have been publicly critical of their policies. The meeting takes place on a cold December morning in the Oval Office. Reagan, despite his advanced age and the early signs of the illness that will later claim him, still projects the charm and authority that made him one of America's most successful politicians. He greets Trump warmly, offering coffee and settling into his favorite chair beside the fireplace. "Donald," Reagan says, his voice carrying that familiar cadence that has comforted and inspired millions of Americans, "I wanted to meet with you because I respect what you've accomplished in business." But he also wanted to discuss your recent political statements. The conversation that follows reveals Reagan's political sophistication and Trump's relative naivety about presidential leadership. Reagan shares insights into the constraints that limit presidential power, the complexity of managing competing constituencies, and the personal costs of political prominence. But he also acknowledges that Trump has identified real problems with American competitiveness that traditional politicians have failed to address. "Donald," Reagan says near the end of their hour together, "politics is different from business. In business, you can choose your partners, control your environment, define success on your own terms. In politics, you inherit problems created by others, work within systems designed to prevent change, and answer to constituencies with conflicting demands." When news of the meeting leaks to the press, it dominates political coverage for weeks. But the coverage reveals something troubling for Trump. The political establishment now takes his potential candidacy seriously enough to warrant presidential intervention. That recognition comes with a level of scrutiny and opposition that could destroy not just his political ambitions, but his business empire as well. As 1987 draws to a close, Trump faces a decision that will define the rest of his life. The federal investigations continue to threaten his financial stability. The media scrutiny has reached levels that make normal business operations difficult. His family expresses concerns about the impact of political life on their privacy and security. Yet the polling data suggests he could mount a serious challenge for the Republican nomination. Stone's operation has identified potential campaign staff, developed preliminary strategies for early primary states, and secured commitments from donors willing to fund an outsider candidacy. The decision comes during a New Year's Eve party at Mar-a-Lago, the Palm Beach estate he purchased 2 years earlier as a winter retreat. Surrounded by friends, family, and business associates, Trump watches fireworks explode over the Atlantic Ocean while contemplating a choice that will affect not just his own future, but the future of American politics. Roger Stone approaches him as midnight approaches, carrying 2 glasses of champagne and a familiar folder of polling data. "Donald," he says quietly, "the filing deadline for the New Hampshire primary is January 15th. If you're going to do this, we need to decide now." Trump takes the champagne, but doesn't respond immediately. Instead, he walks to the terrace railing, looking out at the dark ocean beyond the lights of his estate. The weight of the decision feels different from any business choice he's ever made. Success in politics requires different skills, different sacrifices and different risks than anything he's previously attempted. But failure in politics could cost him everything he spent decades building. The investigations, the media scrutiny, the establishment opposition, they've all escalated in response to his political emergence. If he withdraws now, he'll forever be known as someone who backed down when the stakes got high. As the clock strikes midnight and 1988 begins, Trump makes his decision. But instead of announcing it immediately, he chooses to keep Washington guessing, understanding that speculation and uncertainty can be more powerful than certainty. As 1988 began, Washington realized that Trump wasn't just a celebrity businessman dabbling in politics. He had become a disruptor they could no longer ignore. The limousine slides through the pre-dawn darkness of Manhattan, its bulletproof windows reflecting the amber glow of streetlights as it carries Trump toward what will become the most consequential television appearance of his career. It's February 14th, 1988, and the decision he made 6 weeks ago at Mar-a-Lago has set in motion a chain of events that threatens to consume everything he's built. Today, he will announce his candidacy for President of the United States on Larry King Live. But the price of that announcement is already becoming clear. The New York Times newsroom never sleeps, but at 4:30 a.m. on this Monday morning, it pulses with unusual energy. Executive editor Max Frankel has called an emergency editorial meeting to discuss what internal memos describe as the Trump problem. For weeks, reporters and editors have debated how to take over a presidential candidate whose business practices are under federal investigation, whose qualifications for office are questionable, and whose media strategy seems designed specifically to exploit the press's own weaknesses. He's not a traditional candidate, Frankel tells the assembled editors, his voice carrying the weight off someone who has overseen coverage of every major political story since Watergate. Our normal frameworks don't apply. He attacks us when we criticize him, then provides exclusive access when we cover him favorably. He lies about easily verifiable facts, then accuses us of bias when we correct him. Political reporter R.W. Apple Jr., the newspaper's legendary correspondent who has covered every presidential campaign since 1960, raises a concern that will prove prophetic. We're not just covering Trump. We're being used by him. Every story we write, positive or negative, increases his name recognition and reinforces his outsider narrative. We may be creating the very phenomenon we're trying to analyze. Similar conversations are occurring in newsrooms across the country. At the Washington Post, editors debate whether Trump's candidacy deserves front-page coverage or should be relegated to the entertainment section. At NBC, executives question whether providing a platform for his announcement represents responsible journalism or reckless sensationalism. At CNN, producers argue over how much airtime to dedicate to someone they privately consider a publicity stunt. But as Trump's limousine arrives at CNN studios in the Time Warner Building, these editorial debates become academic. The candidate emerging from the vehicle commands attention through sheer force of personality and controversy. Camera crews from multiple networks position themselves to capture footage of his arrival, while print reporters shout questions that echo through the marble lobby. Mr. Trump, are you prepared for the scrutiny that comes with running for president? Mr. Trump, how do you respond to critics who say you lack the experience for this office? Mr. Trump, what about the federal investigations into your business? Trump pauses at the elevator bank, turning to face the assembled press corps with practiced confidence. Gentlemen, I've been dealing with the press for over a decade. The difference is, now you're going to be held accountable for what you write. The comment reveals how Trump's approach to media relations has evolved since his early days as a Manhattan developer. Where once he courted coverage to build his brand, he now views the press as adversaries to be confronted and controlled. Larry King's studio feels smaller and more intimate than Trump expected, but the host's reputation for softball questions has made this the perfect venue for his announcement. King, wearing his signature suspenders and leaning back in his chair with practiced casualness, opens the show with characteristic directness. Donald Trump, real estate mogul, casino owner, best-selling author, and now presidential candidate. Donald, why are you running for president? Trump leans forward slightly, looking directly into the camera with an intensity that will be replayed thousands of times in the coming months. Larry, I'm running because this country is being ripped off by the very nation we do business with. We're not winning anymore, and I know how to win. The answer represents everything that traditional politicians avoid: simplistic, unprovable, and emotionally charged. Yet its very simplicity makes it effective with voters frustrated by political complexity and nuance. King presses gently on the obvious vulnerabilities. But Donald, you've never held elected office. You have no foreign policy experience. How do you respond to critics who say you're not qualified? For a brief moment, Trump's confidence wavers. The question cuts to the heart of his fundamental weakness as a candidate: his complete lack of government experience. He shifts in his chair, his usual rapid-fire delivery slowing as he searches for an answer that doesn't sound offensive. Larry, he finally responds, I've negotiated with labor unions, with foreign governments, with banks, with contractors. I've created tens of thousands of jobs. I've built an empire. What have the politicians created? Deficits, trade imbalances, weakness. The recovery is skillful, but the hesitation reveals something important. Despite his bravado, Trump understands that his outsider status is both his greatest asset and his most serious vulnerability. The interview continues for a full hour, with Trump systematically dismantling traditional qualifications for presidential leadership while positioning his business success as superior preparation for the office. When King asks about the federal investigations, Trump turns the question into an attack on government overreach. When pressed about his lack of political experience, he reframes inexperience as independence from the failed policies of career politicians. But the interview's most significant moment comes when King asks about media coverage. Donald, you've been very critical of the press. How will you handle media scrutiny as a presidential candidate? Trump's response reveals a strategy that will define not just his campaign, but the relationship between politicians and media for decades to come. Larry, the media has become dishonest. They don't report news, they manufacture narratives. They've forgotten that their job is to inform the public, not to decide elections. As president, I'll hold them accountable. The statement sends shockwaves through newsrooms across the country. Never before has a presidential candidate so directly challenged the media's role in democratic discourse. Political reporters who have spent careers maintaining the pretense of objectivity suddenly find themselves cast as partisan actors in Trump's narrative of establishment corruption. The reaction is swift and coordinated. Within hours of the interview's conclusion, editorial boards at major newspapers publish responses that range from dismissive to outraged. The Washington Post editorial board writes, Mr. Trump's attacks on press freedom represent a fundamental misunderstanding of the First Amendment and the role of journalism in democratic society. The New York Times is more direct. Donald Trump's candidacy represents a clear and present danger to American democratic institutions. His willingness to attack the press, to question the legitimacy of federal investigations, and to promote conspiracy theories disqualifies him from serious consideration for the presidency. But these editorial responses validate Trump's central argument about media bias. For voters already suspicious of press objectivity, the coordinated editorial assault against Trump becomes evidence of the very corruption he claims to oppose. Polling data from the Roper organization shows that Republican voters' trust in major news organizations drops 15 points in the 2 weeks following Trump's announcement. The coverage intensifies dramatically in the weeks following his candidacy declaration. Teams of investigative journalists from major news organizations begin examining every aspect of his empire. The Washington Post assigns 5 reporters to what they internally call the Trump Project. The New York Times creates a dedicated team led by their most experienced investigative reporters. CNN hires additional producers specifically to cover his campaign. This level of scrutiny reveals numerous instances of questionable business practices. Lawsuits from contractors claiming unpaid bills, tax assessments that seem deliberately understated, partnerships with individuals of dubious reputation. But each revelation that would traditionally end a political career somehow strengthens Trump's narrative of establishment persecution. The dynamic reaches a breaking point during a press conference at Trump Tower 3 weeks after his announcement. The Marble Lobby is packed with reporters from major news organizations, their cameras and lights transforming the space into a makeshift television studio. Trump enters with the bearing of a candidate, but he speaks like a CEO addressing hostile shareholders. Ladies and gentlemen, Trump begins, I've called this press conference to address the dishonest and biased coverage my campaign has received from the corrupt media establishment. The opening line immediately reverses the traditional power dynamic of presidential press conferences. Instead of answering reporters' questions about his qualifications, Trump has positioned the assembled journalists as the subject of inquiry. For the next 20 minutes, Trump systematically attacks specific news organizations, individual reporters, and editorial decisions. He produces props, blown-up front pages of newspapers with headlines he claims are misleading, transcripts of television reports with sections highlighted to show bias, and what he claims are internal memos obtained from unnamed sources revealing editorial meetings where coverage decisions were made. The New York Times headline on February 16th read, Trump's business empire built on debt and deception. Trump says, holding up the front page for cameras to capture. But buried on page 23, they admit that every transaction they investigated was legal and properly documented. That's not reporting. That's character assassination. The specificity of his preparation catches many reporters off guard. Trump has clearly spent considerable time and resources analyzing coverage patterns and developing counterarguments. But more importantly, by broadcasting the event live, he bypasses traditional media filters and speaks directly to voters who may never read the buried corrections he references. The press conference's most dramatic moment comes when Maggie Haberman, a respected political reporter from the New York Times, attempts to ask about federal investigations into his business practices. Before she can finish her question, Trump interrupts. Maggie, your newspaper has written 17 negative stories about me in the past 3 weeks. Point 17. You've assigned more reporters to covering my business than you have to covering the federal deficit. Why is that? Haberman, caught off guard by the directness of the attack and clearly uncomfortable with becoming the Asturi herself, struggles to respond professionally. Mr. Trump, we're simply doing our job as journalists to inform voters about candidates' backgrounds. Your job, Trump interrupts again, his voice rising slightly, is to inform voters about candidates and issues. Instead, you're trying to destroy candidates you don't like and protect candidates you do. That's not journalism. That's political activism. The exchange, replayed endlessly on television and radio, crystallizes the conflict between Trump and the media in terms that ordinary voters can understand. Haberman, despite her professionalism and experience, appears defensive and evasive when forced to justify her paper's coverage decisions. The visual reinforces Trump's narrative more effectively than any campaign advertisement could. Yet the confrontational strategy carries significant risks that become apparent in the following weeks. Major news organizations abandon any pretense of traditional objectivity in their coverage of his candidacy. Editorial pages that typically maintain strict separation from news coverage begin influencing reporting decisions. Sources who previously provided Trump with information for business stories now refuse to speak with him. More damaging is the defection of establishment Republicans who view his attacks on press freedom as disqualifying. Senator John McCain, a frequent Trump critic, tells reporters, "A free press is essential to democracy. Any candidate who attacks that principle is unfit for office." Former President Gerald Ford, in a rare public statement, expresses grave concern about candidates who seek to undermine public trust in American institutions. The escalation reaches its peak during a campaign event in New Hampshire, where Trump faces questions from Dan Rather, the legendary CBS anchor, whose career spans from the Kennedy assassination to the Iran hostage crisis. Rather challenges Trump on foreign policy knowledge during what was supposed to be a routine campaign stop. Mr. Trump, Rather says, his voice carrying the authority of decades of covering presidents and world leaders. You've criticized the Reagan administration's approach to arms control negotiations with the Soviet Union. What specifically would you do differently in dealing with Mikhail Gorbachev? The question exposes Trump's most serious weakness as a candidate, his complete lack of foreign policy knowledge. For several uncomfortable seconds, he appears genuinely stumped. The confident businessman who can discuss Manhattan real estate deals with encyclopedic detail clearly has no understanding of nuclear arms treaties or diplomatic protocol. Dan, Trump finally responds, his usual rapid-fire delivery replaced by careful, measured words. That's exactly the kind of question that shows what's wrong with the media. You're asking me to provide detailed plans for negotiations that haven't started yet, with parties that haven't been identified, under circumstances that don't currently exist. Rather, sensing vulnerability, presses further. But Mr. Trump, voters have a right to know how you would handle nuclear weapons policy. These aren't hypothetical issues. They're the most serious responsibility-soft presidential leadership. The follow-up question threatens to expose the fundamental hollowness of Trump's candidacy. Campaign aides later described this as the most dangerous moment of his presidential run, a potential campaign-ending revelation that he lacks basic knowledge required for the office he's seeking. Voters have a right to know that I won't negotiate in public, on television, with a reporter who's trying to embarrass me. Trump responds, his voice regaining some of its usual confidence. They have a right to know that I understand the difference between campaigning and governing. And they have a right to know that I won't play games with America's national security just to satisfy media curiosity. The answer allows Trump to survive the moment. But political analysts note that he has essentially admitted ignorance while blaming the questioner for exposing it. Internal campaign polling conducted immediately after the Rather exchange shows Trump's favorability ratings dropping among college-educated Republicans, a crucial constituency for any serious presidential campaign. The incident forces Trump's campaign to confront a fundamental problem. Attacks on media bias can deflect attention from policy weaknesses, but they cannot eliminate those weaknesses entirely. Focus groups conducted by the campaign reveal that while Trump's base supporters appreciate his media criticism, undecided voters want substantive policy discussions that Trump struggles to provide. This vulnerability becomes a central theme in subsequent media coverage. Tom Brokaw, NBC's veteran anchor, frames the challenge in stark terms during a special report on Trump's candidacy. The question facing Republican voters is whether Donald Trump's business success and media savvy can compensate for his complete lack of government experience and policy knowledge. The assessment proves prescient when Trump appears on ABC's Nightline with Ted Koppel, perhaps the most respected journalist of his generation. The show, designed as a serious examination of presidential candidates' qualifications, becomes instead a public demonstration of the breakdown in traditional media-politician relationships. Koppel opens with what he clearly considers a definitive challenge. Mr. Trump, you've built your campaign on attacking institutions that are fundamental to American democracy: the media, federal law enforcement, the career civil service. How do you expect to govern a system you seem determined to tear down? Trump's response reveals how completely he has internalized the lessons of media combat, but also suggests the limitations of his approach. Ted, I'm not attacking American institutions. I'm attacking corrupt institutions that have forgotten they serve the American people, not their own interests. The media doesn't report news anymore. It manufactures consent for policies the establishment has already decided to implement. The phrase manufacturing consent is borrowed from academic media criticism, revealing that Trump has sophisticated advisors helping to frame his attacks on press credibility. But Koppel, unlike previous interviewers, refuses to be drawn into a debate about media bias. Mr. Trump, Koppel continues, let's talk about what you would actually do as president. How would you restructure trade agreements? What specific changes would you make to nuclear arms policy? How would you reform the federal budget process? The series of concrete policy questions exposes the same weakness that Rather identified. Trump lacks detailed knowledge of government operations and policy implementation. His answers become increasingly vague and defensive as Koppel presses for specifics. Ted, Trump finally says, clearly frustrated by his inability to provide substantive responses, these are exactly the kinds of insider questions that show how disconnected the media is from real Americans. People don't care about the details of arms control treaties. They care about results. Koppel's response is devastating in its simplicity. Mr. Trump, the details of arms control treaties determine whether we have nuclear war or nuclear peace. Don't you think the President of the United States should understand those details? The question hangs in the air for several seconds while Trump searches for an answer that doesn't sound completely ignorant. When he finally responds, his voice lacks its usual confidence. I'll hire the best people. I'll get the best advice. I'll make the best deals. The exchange represents a fundamental failure of Trump's media strategy. By focusing exclusively on attacking press credibility, he has avoided substantive policy discussions that reveal his limitations as a candidate. But experienced journalists like Koppel cannot be deflected indefinitely, and the gaps in Trump's knowledge become impossible to hide. As the 1988 primary season progresses, this dynamic creates increasing problems for Trump's campaign. Media criticism that initially energized his supporters begins to feel repetitive and defensive. Voters who are attracted to his outsider message start questioning whether his business success translates to presidential leadership. The situation reaches a crisis point during the New Hampshire primary campaign when the Concord Monitor, the state's most influential newspaper, publishes a devastating editorial titled "The Emperor's New Clothes." The piece systematically dissects Trump's policy positions, revealing them to be either non-existent or contradictory. Donald Trump asks voters to trust him based on his business success, the editorial concludes, but he refuses to provide any specifics about how he would govern. He attacks the media for asking tough questions, then offers no substantial answers to easy questions. New Hampshire voters deserve better than slogans and insults. The editorial, written by veteran political reporter David Nyhan, carries particular weight because it comes from a respected local source rather than the national media outlets that Trump has successfully portrayed as biased. Internal campaign polling shows the piece significantly damages Trump's standing among undecided Republican voters. More troubling for Trump is the response from rival campaigns, who recognize that media criticism has become his primary political vulnerability. Vice President George Bush, previously cautious about directly attacking Trump, begins questioning his fitness for office. The presidency requires more than the ability to attack reporters, Bush tells audiences in New Hampshire. It requires knowledge, experience, and the humility to serve something greater than yourself. The attack proves effective because it reframes Trump's media battles not as evidence of strength, but as evidence of his limitations as a candidate. Campaign tracking polls show Bush gaining support among Republican voters who appreciate Trump's outsider message, but question his qualifications for the presidency. Standing in his campaign headquarters on the night of the New Hampshire primary, Trump faces the first electoral test of his political career. Early returns show him running third behind Bush and Senator Bob Dole, a disappointing result that validates critics who argued his media strategy could not substitute for traditional campaign organization and policy development. Roger Stone, his political strategist, attempts to put the result in perspective. Donald, you've fundamentally changed the relationship between politicians and the press. Every future candidate will study your techniques for bypassing media filters and controlling coverage narratives. But Trump, studying the vote tallies that represent his first significant political defeat, understands that attacking the media has both revealed and concealed the fundamental weaknesses of his candidacy. The press no longer covered Trump with the deference traditionally accorded to successful businessmen, but neither could he govern simply by criticizing his critics. As the campaign moves toward other primary states, one fact becomes undeniable. The press no longer covered Trump as a curiosity or entertainment story. He had forced them to treat him as a serious political threat, but in doing so, he had also subjected himself to the scrutiny that serious candidates must endure. The fluorescent lights of the Hart Senate office building cast harsh shadows across the mahogany conference table, where Donald Trump sits facing a panel of senators who hold the power to destroy his presidential ambitions. It's March 15th, 1988, and the Senate Judiciary Committee has called him to testify about his business practices, ostensibly as part of a broader investigation into casino regulation. But everyone in the room understands the real purpose: to demonstrate that Trump lacks the character and judgment required for the presidency. Senator Joseph Biden, the committee chairman, shuffles through a thick folder of documents while Trump waits in the witness chair. The folder contains FBI surveillance reports, IRS audit findings, and testimony from contractors who claim Trump's organization engaged in questionable business practices. Behind Biden, committee staff members prepare exhibits designed to embarrass rather than inform. Photographs of Trump with individuals later convicted of organized crime, financial documents showing complex offshore arrangements, and recorded phone conversations obtained through federal wiretaps. Washington insiders would later describe this hearing as the moment when the political establishment revealed both its power and its desperation. Never before had congressional leaders coordinated supinely to destroy a single candidate's electoral prospects. The very intensity of their assault would, paradoxically, validate Trump's central argument about institutional corruption. "Mr. Trump," Biden begins, his voice carrying the authority of someone who has spent decades grilling presidential nominees, "you appear before this committee as a candidate for the highest office in Ireland. But the evidence suggests you may not meet the standards of integrity we expect from our public servants." Trump leans forward in his chair, recognizing that this moment will define not just his campaign, but his entire future. The business empire he spent decades building hangs in the balance, along with his reputation, his family's security, and his dreams of political power. But instead of appearing defensive, he projects the same confidence that carried him through gaming commission hearings and media confrontations. "Senator Biden," Trump responds, "I appear before this committee as an American citizen who has built one of this country's most successful businesses while creating tens of thousands of jobs. If creating wealth and employment disqualifies someone from public service, then this country has lost its way." Biden, clearly prepared for Trump's deflection tactics, produces the first exhibit, a series of FBI surveillance photographs showing Trump at social events with known organized crime figures. The images, blown up to poster size and mounted on easels, dominate the hearing room with their implication of corruption and criminal association. "Mr. Trump," Biden continues, "these photographs show you in the company of individuals who were later convicted of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy. How do you explain these associations?" The question cuts to the heart of Trump's vulnerability as a presidential candidate. Throughout his business career, he has operated in industries where connections to organized crime are persistent and often unavoidable. While prosecutors have never found evidence of criminal activity on Trump's part, the associations create exactly the kind of perception problems that typically end political careers. Trump shifts slightly in his chair, a subtle movement that careful observers note as the first sign of discomfort he's shown during hours of testimony. For a moment, the confident businessman appears to calculate whether his usual counterattack strategy will work against senators armed with FBI surveillance files. "Senator Biden," Trump finally says, "those photographs were taken at charity events, political fundraisers, and business conferences. If guilt by association is the standard, then perhaps this committee should investigate which senators have attended events with lobbyists later convicted of corruption, or which committee members have received campaign contributions from defense contractors later found guilty of fraud." The response demonstrates Trump's refusal to accept traditional standards of political accountability, but it also reveals something troubling to his advisors watching from the gallery. He's defending himself rather than controlling the narrative. The Senate chamber, unlike television studios or campaign rallies, doesn't reward theatrical confrontation as much as it punishes obvious evasion. Senator Orrin Hatch attempts a different approach. "Mr. Trump, this committee isn't interested in guilt by association. We're interested in judgment. Why did you choose to do business with individuals you knew had questionable reputations? Senator Hatch, Trump says, I chose to do business with the best contractors, the most skilled craftsmen, and the most efficient suppliers available. In construction and real estate development, you work with whoever can deliver results. But the hearing's most dangerous moment comes when Senator Ted Kennedy produces evidence that strikes at the core of Trump's business empire. Kennedy, whose family's political dynasty gives him unique authority on questions of power and privilege, reveals that the IRS has discovered significant discrepancies in Trump's tax filings over the past decade. Mr. Trump, Kennedy says, his Boston accent lending gravity to each word. IRS auditors have identified over $40 million in questionable deductions claimed by your organization. These aren't minor accounting errors. They're systematic attempts to avoid paying your fair share of taxes. The revelation hits like a thunderbolt. Trump's face goes ashen, and for several long seconds, the confident businessman appears genuinely stunned. His hands, usually animated during speech, remain motionless on the table. The silence stretches uncomfortably as senators and spectators wait to see if this is the moment when Trump's political career ends. Campaign manager Roger Stone, watching from the gallery, later described this pause as the longest 15 seconds in political history. Trump's usual rapid-fire delivery has abandoned him, replaced by the careful calculation of someone who suddenly understands that his opponents possess information capable of destroying everything he's built. Senator Kennedy. Trump finally responds, his voice noticeably quieter than before. Every deduction claimed by the Trump organization was reviewed and approved by teams of accountants and tax attorneys. If the IRS disagrees with our interpretations of tax law, that's what audits are for. But Kennedy isn't finished. Mr. Trump, these weren't interpretations, they were fabrications. Charitable donations that never occurred. Business expenses for personal travel. Depreciation schedules that violate federal law. The specificity of Kennedy's information reveals something that chills Trump's advisors. Someone within IRS has been providing confidential tax information to Senate Democrats. This isn't routine congressional oversight. It's coordinated political warfare using the full resources of the federal government. Trump's response reveals both his desperation and his strategic acumen. Senator Kennedy, he says, his voice rising with what sounds like genuine indignation. Leaking confidential tax information to congressional committees isn't just wrong, it's criminal. This hearing has just proven that federal agencies are being weaponized against political candidates. The accusation transforms the hearing's dynamic, but not in Trump's favor. Senator Strom Thurmond, the ancient South Carolina Republican whose presence represents the old guard's opposition to Trump's insurgent candidacy, delivers what feels like a final verdict. Mr. Trump, Thurmond says in his distinctive drawl, you may be a successful businessman, but the presidency requires something more than the ability to make money. It requires integrity, judgment, and respect for the institutions that make our democracy possible. Senator Thurmond, Trump responds, the institutions you're defending have given us trade deficits, budget deficits, and a declining standard of living for working Americans. If respecting failed institutions is more important than delivering results, then perhaps that's why this country is losing its competitive edge. As the hearing continues into its fourth hour, the toll on Trump becomes evident. His usually perfect posture slumps in the witness chair. His responses, while still combative, lack their earlier energy and precision. The sustained assault from multiple senators, combined with the revelation of leaked tax information, has forced him to confront the limits of his political strategy. The hearing's conclusion comes when Biden announces that the committee will recommend a formal FBI investigation into Trump's business practices and tax filings. Mr. Trump, Biden says, this committee cannot determine your fitness for the presidency, but we can ensure that voters have access to all relevant information about your background and character. Trump's response carries both defiance and desperation. Senator Biden, he says, this committee has just demonstrated why Americans have lost faith in their government. You're using the power of federal law enforcement to attack a political opponent. But the damage is done. As Trump walks through the gauntlet of reporters outside the hearing room, His usual confidence is replaced by grim determination. For the first time in his political career, he appears genuinely shaken by an opponent's assault. The Senate hearing proves to be only the beginning of Washington's coordinated offensive. In the following days, federal agencies that previously conducted routine oversight suddenly intensify their scrutiny. The Securities and Exchange Commission announces an expanded investigation into Trump Organization's financing practices. The Department of Labor begins examining employment practices and union relationships. The Environmental Protection Agency initiates reviews of construction projects' environmental compliance. What makes these investigations particularly devastating isn't their individual impact, but their cumulative effect on Trump's business empire. Banks that previously competed for his business begin demanding additional collateral and restricting credit access. Chase Manhattan, his primary lender, effectively freezes new lending while demanding accelerated payments on existing loans. Deutsche Bank initiates a comprehensive review that could trigger immediate loan recalls. Trump's longtime banker at Chase, reached confidentially by the Wall Street Journal, explains the impossible position that financial institutions face. We can't be seen as supporting someone under federal investigation, but we also can't be seen as making political decisions about lending. So we just slow everything down until it resolves itself. The financial pressures create a cascade of problems that threaten to topple Trump's empire within weeks. Construction projects halt when contractors demand guaranteed payment. Retail tenants in Trump Tower begin seeking lease modifications. Several licensing deals for Trump-branded properties are canceled by nervous partners. Most critically, the legal bills from multiple federal investigations exceed $2 million per month, a burn rate that would exhaust even Trump's substantial resources within a year. Emergency meetings with lawyers and accountants reveal that his organization cannot survive sustained regulatory assault from multiple agencies simultaneously. For the first time since his early struggles in Manhattan, Trump faces the possibility of complete financial ruin. But unlike his earlier crises, this one isn't caused by market forces or business miscalculations. It's the direct result of government power being systematically deployed against his political ambitions. The severity of a situation becomes clear during a private meeting with New York Governor Mario Cuomo, who has remained publicly neutral in the presidential race, while privately supporting establishment efforts to deny Trump the Republican nomination. Cuomo, speaking in his Albany office with characteristic bluntness, delivers an ultimatum disguised as friendly advice. Donald, Cuomo says, you're a smart businessman. You understand cost-benefit analysis. What's the cost of continuing this campaign versus the benefit of preserving what you've built? The meeting, details of which leaked to New York Magazine 6 months later, reveals how thoroughly the political establishment has mobilized against Trump. State and federal officials, party leaders, and business interests have coordinated an assault designed to force him from the race through financial pressure rather than electoral defeat. Governor, Trump responds, according to the leaked account, what you're describing isn't politics, it's sextortion. Withdraw from the race or we'll destroy your business. Cuomo's alleged response captures the establishment's perspective. Donald, nobody's threatening you, we're just pointing out that certain actions have certain consequences. Running for president means accepting a level of scrutiny that most businesses can't survive. But the conversation also reveals Trump's growing understanding of the real stakes involved. This isn't just about winning or losing an election. It's about whether the existing power structure will tolerate fundamental challenges to its authority. The crisis deepens when New York State's banking regulators announce their own investigation into Trump's financial practices, specifically focusing on his relationships with offshore entities and foreign investors. Banking Superintendent Peter Keating, speaking at a press conference featuring blown-up charts of Trump's corporate structure, frames the investigation in terms that threaten Trump's entire financial foundation. We have a responsibility to ensure that New York's banking system isn't being used to facilitate questionable financial arrangements, Keating announces. Mr. Trump's complex web of partnerships and offshore entities raises serious questions about transparency and compliance with federal banking laws. The state investigation triggers immediate financial consequences. Banks begin freezing accounts pending regulatory review. Investors in Trump projects demand return of their capital. Construction lenders refuse to disburse committed funds. Trump's response to this escalating crisis reveals both his political sophistication and his fundamental isolation from traditional sources of support. Rather than seeking accommodation with the establishment forces arrayed against him, he decides to make their assault the centerpiece of his political message. The strategy culminates in what becomes known as the Mar-a-Lago speech, a nationally televised address that Trump delivers from his Palm Beach estate on April 30th, 1988. The setting, surrounded by opulent decor that symbolizes his business success, provides stark visual contrast to his message about persecution and institutional corruption. My fellow Americans, Trump begins, looking directly into the camera with an intensity that holds viewers' attention for 30 minutes. For the past 6 weeks, you have witnessed something unprecedented in our nation's history. Federal agencies, congressional committees, and party leaders have coordinated an assault on my candidacy that has nothing to do with my qualifications and everything to do with my threat to their power. The speech, watched by over 40 million Americans, represents Trump's most direct challenge to institutional authority in American politics. He systematically details the investigations, the leaked information, the administrative harassment, and the financial pressure designed to force him from the race. They leaked my confidential tax information, Trump continues. They coordinated investigations across multiple agencies. They pressured banks to freeze my credit. They organized party leaders to deny me the nomination regardless of how many primaries I win. But the speech's most powerful moment comes when Trump addresses the broader implications of the establishment's assault. The question facing our country isn't whether Donald Trump should be president, he says. The question is whether American voters still have the right to choose their leaders, or whether that choice will be made by federal bureaucrats and party bosses. Political analysts would later identify this speech as a pivotal moment in American political discourse, the first time a major candidate explicitly accused the federal government of coordinating against his campaign. While previous politicians had complained about unfair treatment, none had systematically documented institutional bias with Trump's specificity and reach. The response divides along predictable lines, but with unexpected intensity. Editorial boards at major newspapers denounced the speech as demagogic and dangerous to democratic institutions. The New York Times editorial board writes, Mr. Trump's paranoid fantasies about government persecution reveal a mindset fundamentally incompatible with democratic leadership. The Washington Post is more direct. A candidate who attacks federal law enforcement lacks the temperament for presidential office. George Bush's campaign, recognizing an opportunity to distance themselves from Trump's increasingly toxic candidacy, issues a statement through spokesman Pete Thiele. Vice President Bush believes in the integrity of our federal investigative agencies and rejects any suggestion that they operate as political weapons. The statement, while carefully worded, effectively abandons Trump to face the establishment assault alone. But polling data reveals that Trump's message resonates powerfully with voters who feel disconnected from political institutions. A CNN poll conducted immediately after the speech shows 68% of Republican voters believing that Trump has been treated unfairly, while 58% say the investigations make them more likely to support his candidacy. Dr. Kathleen Hall Jamieson, a University of Pennsylvania political scientist, captures the speech's significance in comments to the New York Times. Trump has essentially argued that federal law enforcement has been politicized against him. If voters believe that argument, it represents a fundamental crisis of institutional legitimacy. The establishment's response to this polling data reveals how completely they misunderstand the political moment they have created. Instead of recognizing that their assault on Trump has validated his outsider message, they intensify their efforts to remove him from the race. The final escalation comes when FBI Director William Sessions announces that the Bureau has opened a formal criminal investigation into Trump's business practices, focusing specifically on potential violations of federal racketeering statutes. The announcement, made at a hastily called press conference, provides few details but maximum political damage. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has a responsibility to investigate credible allegations of criminal activity regardless of the subject's political ambitions, Sessions tells reporters. Mr. Trump's candidacy does not provide immunity from federal law enforcement. The criminal investigation represents the ultimate weapon in Washington's arsenal against Trump's candidacy. Unlike administrative harassment or congressional oversight, a criminal probe carries the possibility of indictment, conviction, and imprisonment. More immediately, it provides legal justification for seizing business records, freezing assets, and compelling testimony from associates. But the investigation also completes Trump's transformation from insurgent candidate to martyred outsider. Focus groups conducted by his campaign reveal that supporters interpret the criminal probe as final proof that the establishment will use any means necessary to prevent authentic change. This perception crystallizes during Trump's final campaign appearance before suspending his candidacy, eerily in New Hampshire, where he first tested his political appeal 18 months earlier. The crowd of 15,000 supporters creates an atmosphere more reminiscent of a religious revival than a political event. They think they've won, Trump tells the crowd, his voice carrying both defiance and resignation. They think that by weaponizing federal law enforcement, they can choose your leaders for you. But they've vehemently proven that everything I've said about corruption in Washington is true. The speech concludes with Trump's announcement that he is suspending his presidential campaign to focus on defending himself against federal prosecutors. I will not allow the destruction of my family and employees to continue while I fight for the American people, he says. But this is not the end. This is the beginning. The aftermath of Trump's withdrawal reveals both the personal costs of his confrontation with Washington and the broader implications for American political discourse. Trump returns to New York financially damaged and legally embattled, but also transformed by his understanding of how power actually operates in American politics. The financial toll proves severe. Legal bills from the various investigations ultimately exceed $8 million, forcing Trump to liquidate several properties and abandon planned developments. His credit rating drops 3 levels, making future expansion nearly impossible. Most personally painful, he's forced to lay off over 500 employees from the Trump Organization, including longtime associates who had helped build his empire. Ivana Trump, in a rare interview with Barbara Walters 6 months after the campaign's end, reveals the personal strain that the political warfare created within the family. The children couldn't understand why Daddy was always angry, always on the phone with lawyers, she says. Donald would stay awake until 3 a.m., reading every newspaper article, every editorial that attacked him. It consumed him. But the political education Trump received proves invaluable. Roger Stone, meeting with Trump at Mar-a-Lago 6 months after the campaign's end, finds his former candidate studying not business reports, but political strategy memos and demographic analyses. The federal investigations have concluded without criminal charges, though Trump's business empire remains damaged by the financial disruption and negative publicity. Donald, Stone says, 1988 taught us something important. The establishment has more power than we realized, but they also have more to lose. Every tactic they used against you eroded public trust in the institutions they need to maintain their authority. Trump nods, but his attention is focused on longer-term implications. The polling data from his final months shows that his core supporters didn't abandon him despite the federal investigations. They became more committed to his cause because of them. More significantly, his attacks on institutional bias have resonated with voters far beyond his original base. A post-election analysis by the Brookings Institution identifies what they term the Trump effect: measurable decline in public trust in federal agencies, congressional oversight, and party leadership among Republican voters. The report warns that institutional legitimacy, once damaged, is extremely difficult to restore. Dr. Norman Ornstein, a longtime Washington observer, captures the longer-term significance in a prescient interview with the Washington Post. Trump lost the battle but may have won the war. He's shown that institutional authority depends on public consent, and that consent can be systematically undermined by candidates willing to pay the personal cost. James Baker, Reagan's former Treasury Secretary and a key figure in the Republican establishment that opposed Trump, offers a different perspective in his private memoir, published years later. "We stopped Trump in 1988, but we may have created something worse." His supporters now view every federal investigation, every congressional hearing, every party decision as evidence of corruption. "We won the election, but lost the argument." Standing in his Palm Beach estate as 1989 begins, Trump understands that his political education is complete. The senators, prosecutors, and party leaders who destroyed his campaign have taught him exactly how the system works and, more importantly, how it can be defeated. The establishment's victory in 1988 has revealed its own greatest vulnerability: complete dependence on public trust in institutions that fewer Americans respect with each passing year. By overreaching against Trump, they have weakened the very authority they were trying to defend. But they have also shown that even the full power of the federal government can barely defeat a single candidate with limited resources and no political experience. Next time, and Trump is certain there will be a next time, he will be better prepared, better funded, and facing an establishment whose credibility has been further eroded by its own heavy-handed tactics. 20 years later, political historians would look back on 1988 as the year when American institutional authority began its irreversible decline. The establishment won its battle against Trump, but in doing so, it had demonstrated exactly how far it would go to protect its power and how little it trusted the American people to make their own choices. Trump left Washington in 1988 weakened, but not broken, financially damaged, but politically educated. Most importantly, he had learned that the establishment's greatest strength, its control over institutions, was also its greatest weakness. That control depended on public faith that could be systematically destroyed by someone willing to pay the price for challenging it. The war between Trump and Washington was over, but the larger conflict between institutional authority and populist rebellion was just beginning. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like. It helps a lot and keeps us bringing more content like this.